So welcome to our One Gas Fireside Chat series. We have Sophia Pappas with us this week, and she moved here from New York City to help manage the Birth Through 8 initiative of the George Kaiser Family Foundation. This is an education equity initiative that is so important. She's presented before to our group, but it's been a while. So Sophia, I'm so happy that we were able to have you here today to give us an update on what you've been doing, how the pandemic maybe has affected your work. And again, if people will think of some questions, I'm going to mute myself, turn it over to you, and I'll be back with questions in a bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I want to acknowledge there's so much happening in our community. I mean, clearly over the past year and in the past week, it seems like there's always something new to challenge us. And I know some of you may have lost heat or water or electricity, or maybe still dealing with those challenges. So really appreciate you making time this morning to engage in what I hope is a conversation together. So to get us started along those lines, before I go through my slides, I'd love to hear maybe through the chat, as Wendy said, you guys use that for these. Just what do you already know about either the Birth Through 8 strategy for Tulsa, or just if you don't know anything about it, early childhood programs in Tulsa. You can also chat what you want to know from this discussion, just so I have that top of mind. All right, I'm seeing some knowledge about individual programs like CAP Tulsa, and also just the way that Tulsa and Oklahoma have stood out as leaders in early childhood ed. And educares, that's correct. We have more than any, and we're now working towards that fourth one, which is more than others. All right, and anything that you would like to really make sure that you get out of this discussion, or something on your mind related to our support of young children living in poverty? Seeing some interest in how the pandemic affects the work that we do and how we can mitigate those kind of things in the future. Transportation, yeah. All right.
I know there's also always a lot of interest in digital access, and that's been an ongoing effort in our community. And we've had different people update us along the time, but if you have any updates on digital access, that would be
sure. Yeah, we can touch on that as well. Well, this is all really important to keep in mind as I'm going through the slides and as Wendy and I engage. And if you have more questions, I'm not going to be able to see the chat when I share my screen, but I'm fine with you jumping in if that's okay. So speaking of digital stuff, and I'm a little tech not savvy, so bear with me. I think I know how to share my screen a year into the pandemic, but let's just see. All right, can y'all give me a thumbs up if you can see?
Yes, we can see it. If you want to put it on presentation mode, that's great. If you just want to keep it right where it is.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. I learned that too. Thank you, Wendy.
You look great.
All right, so I'll do this quickly because I really want to make this about discussion. As Wendy said, I'm from George Kaiser Family Foundation. Birth Through 8 strategy for Tulsa is actually, I'm going to actually drop down to our list of partners to keep in mind. When we talk about what this work is, it really is about nonprofits, public sector agencies, community leaders, and philanthropy all coming together to tackle intergenerational poverty with a focus on the earliest years of a child's life. And so I'm sure many of you are familiar with these, or some or all of these orgs. Someone had mentioned Educare and CAP, they're part of the birth through 8 strategy. And you'll see others that you might not automatically think of when you think of programming serving young children, but that are integral to our work. So for example, there's a criminal justice component, and we work with Still She Rises, Youth Services of Tulsa, and that's related to teen parents. So just to point that out, the other thing to point out is you'll see a mix of education, health, social service, and criminal justice orgs. And that's really important because while Oklahoma has been a leader in a lot of ways in Tulsa and early childhood, one of the big gaps that we were trying to fill is we've got all these programs and these strengths as a community, but they're not always aware of what each other's doing. And there's real effort through the birth through 8 strategy for Tulsa to increase the coordination and collaboration across these partners in the service of shared goals. So what are those goals? Well, I mentioned that the overarching mission is about tackling intergenerational poverty. And because of everything we know about early brain development, how critical those early years are, our focus is on the first 8 years of life. And when we think about our goals, it's really about following that child. So our work, even though it's birth through 8, actually has to start before birth in order to increase the percentage of kids who are born healthy. And so we start with preconception and prenatal. And we're first looking at, well, how are kids doing at birth? Then what does that look like by age 3, kindergarten and 3rd grade? And it's important to note when we talk about a child's development or these outcomes, we are talking about the whole child. Social, emotional, language, literacy, cognitive, all those elements are important throughout a child's life, and certainly in those first 8 years. We also have goals around enabling conditions. We work directly with parents as well to support them as they're trying to support their kids, and often under very difficult circumstances. So we have programming related to financial mobility and community mobilization as an example, and also helping parents get connected to services that they need. So for example, it's cold and maybe they need to get connected with utilities. That's going to affect their ability to engage with their child as well. Just to give you a quick snapshot of our timeline, we started, the official launch was in 2017, but really planning began over a year before then with a lot of community stakeholders to try to figure out what are we trying, with all the strengths that we have, we're not necessarily seeing all the outcomes that we would want to see for young kids in poverty. What do we need to be doing differently? Those were a lot of the questions that were asked. And so after that process and getting some national funding through Blue Meridian Partners, we, as a match to our investment, we had a first phase that was it was very much about ramp up, getting programs up and running, programs that were already in existence, bringing them in for different trainings and to talk about how we can engage in continuous learning and improvement together, and so forth. Then now we're in our second phase, which is 6 years. And really it's about continued growth and scaling, ensuring sustainability of these programs, and filling gaps that we learned about in that first launch. For example, engaging with child care centers outside of CAP and Educare. And then as far as our reach, we are focusing on children under the age of 9 living in poverty in the county. So we hope over time to reach about 80% of those children. Now, one thing to note is our work with countywide is really up until that birth to 3 spot, or really school age. Once we get into school age, we focus on kids within the TPS catchment area, which also does include charter schools such as Legacy. Okay, and Connect First is an important component of the birth through 8 strategy that I want to highlight for 2 reasons. One is I talked about weaving together services or getting out of our silos and really helping parents connect with services while also having touch points where they can learn about how to support their child's development. So Connect First is a partnership with, you'll see these nonprofits and public sector groups. Right now is focused on prenatal through age 3. It starts with a family advocate from the health department, reaching out to pregnant mothers who are enrolled in Sooner Care to make them aware of how they can support their child's development, and also to get them connected to services such as prenatal care or WIC. And then we continue to support that parent with this kind of team-based approach. So Parent-Child Center starts their work at birth in the hospital when they see that parent and deliver education about period of purple crying, how to have a safe and nurturing environment for your infant, and to engage in meaningful interactions. And we also work with OU for the Healthy Steps program. One of the big areas that we learned about in the planning process was people are going to their pediatricians and they trust their doctors. And there is a program that comes from a national group called 0 to 3 that is really about adding capacity within pediatric settings to help parents get connected with services, learn about their child's development, get the proper screenings, and so forth. So I won't go into all the details of other Connect First programs, other than to say that we're in the process of also thinking about expansion through school entry with a collaboration with TPS. And just finally, I'd like to highlight our approach to community authority, which has become increasingly important over the first phase and into the second phase of the birth through 8 strategy. And really, to have enduring positive outcomes for our community, there needs to be increased decision-making and input from those most directly impacted. So that's really the thinking behind this. Over time, we are building out a lot of these components, such as trusted messengers. So already before BEST, there was a network of churches working on delivering early literacy strategies through Talking is Teaching. That was one example pre-BEST. Another example now during BEST is we have community liaisons whom we compensate to engage their own networks of community members, parents with young children, to understand what are their hopes and dreams for their kids, what's getting in the way of that, and then how can we do better? And then shared decision-making, a key component of this is through our advisory committee. So you may recognize some folks on this screen. These are all leaders who have been engaged in our work in different ways. For example, Carlisha Williams Bradley through Impact Tulsa, Dr. Saisha Dennis from OU is a new member. We have representation from the city through Crystal Reyes, Greg Robinson from Met Cares. Maria Elena Kuykendall is from Community Service Council, and she actually leads a group of promotores who are some of those trusted messengers I talked about. So this advisory board is critical to influencing the direction of our work. And while it says advisory, we're moving towards them having more decision-making authority on certain investment decisions and other areas of our strategic direction. So I won't go into this too much of our priorities. I already mentioned we're trying to infuse community authority throughout BEST through our collaboration with advisory, and also to launch a multi-year racial equity plan. And this was something this year, as we looked at the pandemic, there were questions about, the impacts of that and what we're doing. Well, one thing we noticed was how inequities that were already there, that were along racial lines, as well as socioeconomic, were getting worse. And so, and then we also had the events of through the summer and fall, really highlighting the systemic oppression that our community and country are unfortunately still grappling with. So this was in part building on things that we were thinking of for our phase 2 plan, but also in response to that. And so through the pandemic, we have been doing a lot of some things that we don't normally do. Obviously, there's a huge need for virtual assistance because if you're a home visitation program, like Parent-Child Center does Family Connects, you couldn't go into the home. So we gave some support to be able to do some form of virtual connecting. There are challenges with certain people not having devices. So we try to use phone where possible. We have a partnership with the Housing Authority where we invested in hotspots for one of their housing developments in North Tulsa, Comanche. And we also did a lot of direct basic needs. So whether it was cash cards for Walmart or direct cash assistance for certain communities, or helping with food and diapers, that has also been part of the work of the pandemic. I think that's it. Okay, so those were the top line slides, and I think the one thing I didn't address was transportation. We continue to see that as a challenge as well. We're actually in the process as a team and with our advisory group of brainstorming more of what we could do there. And so we've done things like gas cards, but for people who don't have cars, obviously that doesn't help. And so we're trying to think of other ways. And the only other thing that I'll mention from the pandemic is noticing that there's a lot happening with virtual learning. We worked with certain partners who were requesting engaging materials for parents to do with their kids at home. For young children, as you can imagine, hands-on learning is very important. So there was some targeted effort there as well. So I thank you for highlighting some things that you wanted to know. I hope I was helpful in touching on some of that. I also know this is a lot and there's so much about BEST I didn't even mention. So I invite Wendy and all of you to ask whatever questions you have.
Yeah, so I'll start with a couple of my own and we'll see if anything, you don't need to worry about the chat. I'll help manage that, Sophia, I guess, unless you have a direct message. But one question I have is BEST modeled on an initiative elsewhere or is it unique to Tulsa?
Sorry, I thought something else came up. Oh, did it share? Sorry.
I stopped your sharing. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I was just confused. I get disoriented with technology. Okay. So BEST, yes and no. So there are a lot of ways that BEST is tailored to Tulsa. I will say there are elements of what we've seen in other places that we're drawing from. So there are certainly programs that come from other places like Healthy Steps, like Family Connects, which is a home visitation model. There are also certain elements of other place-based initiatives like the Harlem Children's Zone that we were looking at. And there are some places that are doing something or starting to do something similar to Connect First with some sort of navigation function for families. But in its entirety and the way it's come together has really been tailored to the assets and needs of Tulsa.
So one of your partners is Impact Tulsa, and of course they have presented to us before as well. So I understand them as a collective impact backbone organization around education equity as well. How are you similar to Impact Tulsa? How are you different, and how do you work together?
Sure. Well, we're really fortunate in our community to have an organization like Impact Tulsa doing their work with a lot of different backbone functions, cradle to career, and then also having our work, which is birth rate and with a very targeted focus on the early years. And when I think about what we're doing together, part of it is Impact Tulsa is actually leading. We're leading efforts to bring BEST partners together in continuous improvement cycles. We've called them collaborative action networks. And well, that's really Impact Tulsa's term. They have collaborative action networks for other initiatives as well. And there's also a lot of capacity building that Impact Tulsa supports with for organizations to use data for continuous improvement within their own organization. because we found a lot of times to work together collaboratively in continuous improvement, orgs need help to look at their own data. So Impact also has been really helpful with that. And then also there's a big component of BEST that I haven't talked about, which is about integrated data and using data to improve the quality and access to services. Impact Tulsa has a lot of great data and data tools that we are drawing from. And we have a director of data systems and technology who works very closely with Dalia from Impact Tulsa on the overall strategy and direction and how it all relates to each other.
Yeah, data is, it's really its own area of expertise these days. And if you don't have that expertise, it's hard to pretend like you do. Why did you all choose birth through age 8? It seems like, there's the 3rd grade reading scores, the, 5th or 6th grade math. Like, it seems like there's lots of places you could end your, I understand why you start with almost even pre-birth, but why 8?
Well, when we think about a child's development, the early years, there are a lot of different definitions of this, but really that the whole birth through 8 is a defining feature in how kids learn and what's happening internally as they're making sense of the world and themselves. And so there's that. And also there's research on fade out problems where even if you do a lot in birth to 3, those gains are not necessarily built upon and sustained later on. And so we took all that into account. And one of the benefits of working with orgs like Impact Tulsa is that there are other initiatives and orgs that are going beyond age 8 that we can partner with.
Nice. So one of the things that was evident in the chat early on is we all have sort of internalized that message that, wow, Tulsa and Oklahoma are a leader in early childhood development. Are we still a leader? Are we still pushing the boundaries? Are other people catching up with us? What is our status in that?
I'm sorry, I was responding to something in the chat. Say it again.
So the fact that we were a leader in early childhood development, are we still that leader? Are others catching up? Are we still pushing the boundaries?
Oh, Wendy, you're so competitive.
I am. I didn't.
No, it's fine. Well, I have been very focused on our work in Tulsa, so I honestly haven't been as plugged into all the national rankings and all of that. I think a lot of states have been focusing on states and communities on increasing pre-K access. I was one of them. I came from New York, where we made full day pre-K available to all kids in the city. I don't know that there's been as much traction on the birth to 3 part of it. I think because of the fade out research, more communities are thinking about what happens in the early grades, whether we're still considered ahead of the pack. I'm not so sure. I think our direction with place-based initiatives is actually smart and is the next stage of the early childhood work nationally, or I hope so. We do have opportunities through our national funders, Blue Meridian partners, to share lessons learned and influence the direction of others, because now they're supporting other place-based communities. We have sort of a sister initiative in Guilford County, North Carolina, called Get Ready Guilford, and they're doing a lot of some of the similar things that we are, and we thought partner, but there I think is more to come on that. So I do consider this the wave kind of, and I certainly saw the limitations of just focusing on pre-K, first as a pre-K teacher, then as an advocate and policymaker.
That's a great point. And yes, so I guess the competitiveness comes from the fact that it was just such a relief to be ahead of the curve in something instead of behind the curve in something. So you had a chat about something called 9B and
a
little inside baseball. I don't even know what
Thank goodness for 9B. Yeah, 9B.
Tell me more about that. What is it? Why is it important?
Well, I talked about different, or maybe I didn't talk as much about this. A big part of our work is supporting these partner orgs with different skills and tools that they need. And there's so many different needs, as you can imagine, with that diversity of partners. One common thread has been needs around data capacity and use of data. And 9B Corp is one of the orgs, a group of consultants that we work with that have been really helpful to a number of these partners as they are addressing different data challenges.
So it's a for-profit business that you all.
I don't think they're for-profit.
Oh, so they're not for-profit?
They are actually a benefit corp.
I don't know.
Yeah, they're a benefit corporation. So they sit somewhere between for-profit and nonprofit, meaning they work towards the benefit of the community, and that is their focus. And so it operates differently, so they don't get nonprofit dollars as a 501c3.
So they're a private sector business, but they still have sort of a public service focus.
Yes,
Cool.
Very much so. And within the scope of that benefit corporation, they have requirements of what they give back to the community.
Okay. Well, I learned something today. Linda, I may want to learn more about that.
Happy to
Thanks,
help.
Linda.
Great. So Sophia, my next question to you is a little bit more personal. So what has the experience been like of moving from New York to Tulsa? And maybe even, how have you acclimated to the Tulsa community and to your work here?
Well, maybe I should ask the Tulsa community. No, I'm kidding. Well, it's been 3 years, and it's been interesting to be here through everything over the past year and then before then, because I feel like I've had 2 experiences. Like that first transition, I moved down to, I was living in an apartment downtown, kind of maintaining some of my New York City, like familiarities there, being able to walk to things and things like that. And the difference for me in that first phase from New York, the biggest difference was how tightly knit the community is. And in New York, one of my frustrations was feeling anonymous. And honestly, people think we have good coffee, but the good coffee places in New York are so freaking small and busy that you end up going to a Starbucks 9 times out of 10 or not drinking coffee. Or God forbid, you make your own coffee in your tiny apartment where you have no business making anything in that tiny kitchen. So I love like coming here. There is a variety of things to do and great coffee places where you can spread out and, actually have meetings, which I used to do pre-pandemic. So I appreciated that in the restaurants and the people. Like, oh, I get to see people that I know in Chimera and make that personal connection and not get lost in the masses. And then during the pandemic, it was, I got sick of being in an apartment. I hung up my apartment keys and moved to a house. My husband and I moved here a few weeks ago, and now I feel like a true Tulsan. Like, I own a house, I'm an adult. People are dropping plants by as housewarming gifts. I never thought I would even own a house, but I love it. I still don't like driving. So if you ever see me on the road, you probably go in the other direction. I'm not the greatest.
So I love that vision of people dropping off plants, and that is a beautiful thing about Tulsa. And thinking about the fact that so many of us are missing those spontaneous connections. We used to just run into people, like you said, at a Chimera. What have you learned about your personal leadership style during all of this?
Oh gosh, well, I think Tulsa has really helped me see the importance of relationships. And not that I don't want to paint a picture of New York as like everyone's cold and abrasive, but there is sort of a culture of working where you get down to business and you're not visiting with people. You're like going down your agenda and you're getting out of there to go to Starbucks. And then here, I just saw the power of taking time to build relationships with team, with partners, because I mean, people here know each other from, whatever. I went to Central, you went, it's just like you hear that all the time. And so thinking about that in my own personal leadership style, I feel like I've grown stronger. And I would say during the pandemic, actually being virtual has forced me to improve in certain elements of my leadership that I wouldn't like, because you have to overcome this sort of, I mean, it's hard to connect personally over Zoom. So I had to work even harder to get to know people and to, I'm an external processor, but to really listen and engage, having to unmute myself is actually really helpful to my personal leadership style. And so I think it just helped with that. And I've become a much more collaborative leader overall, and really investing in people and community in the way that I listen, in the way that I respond or don't respond, stepping back more than always stepping up, and being very intentional about how to calibrate that.
I love that also reflection to the fact that we're on Zoom, where we have to consciously decide whether to mute or unmute ourselves. It makes those decisions a little bit more upfront, whereas in a in-person meeting, we might either dominate and talk the whole time or not talk, depending on what our normal habits are. So that's a great thing to think about. So one other question I was thinking of, and it has escaped me. So yes, the struggle is real, Amari, for sure. So what do you see? Oh, I know what the question was. Policy. If Tulsans could make one policy change that would impact youngest citizens and community members for good, what would it be?
Oh, this is a good one. Not that the others weren't good. Let me, it's challenging me more.
Yeah.
One policy.
We think a lot about programs, but there's also sort of that.
I think, I mean, it's hard to boil it down to one. I do think that the ability for kids and parents to actually access mental health services, like throughout this early period, is a gap in, our health system.
Yeah.
And there's a lot about infant attachment with caregiver that is impacted by mental health. And so when we say infant mental health, it's really about the attachment, but that affects like the brain's development and then a child's development over time. And so I think there are ways of making that more accessible through policy and through, Medicaid, as an example. And so I think maybe that, I mean, there are a lot of barriers that people face in the way that policies are currently implemented. And something we're trying to do is increase community voice in providing input to policymakers. So sure, I went to policy school and I've been a policy maker for a long time, but a big shift in my own leadership style is even how we think about that question. So I might have an idea based on my experience and my education, but I'm not the one most directly impacted. So I think if we were to say a change in the approach to policy making, I think actually listening to the people who are most impacted and those on the front lines, as those who have power are, within, let's say, state agencies and others are shaping directions, that they're actually responding to that, but also building on ideas that people may have in how they experience policy on the ground.
Yeah, so our first chat of January was with Ashley Phillipson, who's now at Impact Tulsa.
Yeah, she's on our advisory too.
Yeah, so the community authority you were talking about, and that sort of shift from top-down policy making to community engagement around policy making, I think is something she was advocating too. So I will be sending out the recordings of all of these chats to everyone who's registered, probably very soon, because we're about halfway through our winter series. And so I would encourage people to catch Ashley Phillipson's presentation on that community engagement piece.
Yeah, I encourage it too, and I'd like to see it.
Okay, I'll send you, you're now registered, so you'll get the recordings as well.
Oh, okay, good.
We have so many people who are just a treasure to our community. You are one of them. I am not seeing any more questions from the chat, so I will go ahead and wrap us up. My last question to you, Sophia, is if there's one thing we could do to help you in your work, what would it be?
Well, I might do two things. One is I'm going to chat my email address. If anyone wants to continue the discussion, because I didn't get a chance to learn about any of you really. And if you have more questions or you want to get involved, please email me. We are revamping our website, but you can also go on our website through George Kaiser Family Foundation to learn more about birth rate strategy. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you, and if you have questions or you have ideas about what we're doing, you can share those with me. We do work with reading partners, and I know some of their programming is different because of the pandemic, but it's a great program to get involved with directly to support kids in kindergarten, first and second grade. So those would be the two things that I would encourage you to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone being on the call today, and join us next week when we have Kim Johnson, the CEO of the Tulsa Library. So thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Be safe and warm and take care of each other.